Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
As you'll hear today, I am far from an expert on generative artificial intelligence. When ChatGPT and DALL-E and the other AIs first became available, I played around with them like we all did. They were interesting. I tried to get ChatGPT to write the fantasy book that I've been waiting 13 years for a certain author to finish himself. The result was not great. But it was fun for a while. I just never found a practical use for them, personally. Now, you could argue that I am a creative professional worried that generative AI is coming for my job, and that makes me biased. You might even be right. There is certainly a type of backlash to the tech companies pushing this technology as the next big thing that can seem bitter or personal or dismissive. But you know who isn't bitter or personal or dismissive? Gigantic investment banks looking to make gigantic profits. In fact, they're among the most credible sources of analysis on new technology, given that the next big thing in tech, whatever it is, will be worth tens of billions of dollars to the firms that invest in it. And institutions like Goldman Sachs are very much in the business of making tens of billions of dollars. So, yeah, when I say, guys, I don't know about this ChatGPT thing, seems like a gimmick, whatever, you don't have to listen to me. But when an official report from one of the world's most successful investment banks says essentially the exact same thing, well, it's probably time to consider the future of generative AI and if it has much of one. I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. This is The Big Story. Ed Zitron is the CEO of EasyPR, which is a national tech and business public relations agency. He is also the author of the impeccably named tech and culture newsletter, Where's Your Ed At? Hello, Ed.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing well, and I'm often fascinated by your AI writing because as somebody who has often struggled to see the use cases for generative AI, you seem to get at that a lot.
Yeah, and it's a very frustrating movement because you see all of these headlines about the AI present and the AI future and how many crazy things AI will do. But if you look even a millimeter under the surface, there's nothing. There really isn't a killer app at all. It's been a while now. We should have one.
The reason you're here today is because in one of your recent posts, you dug into a report from Goldman Sachs about the actual money that is supposed to be driving all of this. And that's what I want to talk to you about, but maybe just set the groundwork for us. When did this era of generative AI really begin? Like when we talk about the current movement, what are we discussing?
So we're really talking about the launch of ChatGPT in November 2022. And that was when the very first real exposure for large language models happened. They were puttering around, I think, since like 2019, perhaps. But ChatGPT was the moment where everyone kind of said, wow, you can generate a lot of text from this. You can generate entire articles that seem good as long as you don't read them. And we'd already kind of had some exposure to it through DALL-E Mini, which was OpenAI's way of generating images.
Right.
And I think that predated ChatGPT. But from there, the extrapolation from ChatGPT to just this incredibly insane AI narrative has just been, I have not seen anything like it.
I think we all remember, or at least most of us who have played around with the thing, remember when ChatGPT opened up, going and throwing some fun prompts in there or just trying to get it to engage with you. But over the past couple of years, as to your point, this movement has been growing and growing. Where has ChatGPT been utilized? And I don't mean just ChatGPT, but all the large language models. What have they been incorporated into at this point?
That's a bloody good question. So There are startups that are based on GPT that have found quick ways to generate answers to queries. There are a ton of different companies that help you evaluate large data sets using generative AI. And otherwise, nowhere that you'd actually really use. It's in Bing search engine, so Microsoft search engine. You can use it there. It's in Google search, which is why we have Google search telling us to eat rocks.
Right.
Or put glue on pizza, which by the way, those two queries, everyone's saying they're gone now. They have other stupid ones to replace them. When you're thinking of a major movement like this, you can usually point to something and you can't hear. And it's so strange. It's so bizarre. It's very reminiscent of both the cryptocurrency and the metaverse movements, two things that I refused to compare it to until recently because those ones also had no killer apps. You had a bunch of money, but you didn't have anything to really point to.
Mm-hmm.
The users are not there, but also in this case, really neither are the products other than ChatGPT.
I think everybody who's messed around with ChatGPT and the language stuff knows that, yeah, it's not advancing very fast. But what about images and video? I mean, judging by like Sora and some of the stuff that at least that I've seen shared online, it does appear to be a lot better than it initially was.
Okay. I mean, that's cool. But to do video at the scale where you would actually be able to replace anyone with it, you would also need to like eliminate hallucinations from large language models, something that has been repeatedly proven to be impossible. You would also have to get over the fact that it takes 20 minutes to process a 3 to 20 second clip.
Mm-hmm.
The other problem is both in the case of images and videos. Well, videos are just extra normally expensive. That's why only a few people have access to Sora. But when it comes to images, you'll notice that a lot of them look very similar, and that's because they're running out of training data. They don't actually have distinguished training data because all of these models require so much data to train on that they basically all kind of look and sound the same. And this is going to be a problem again across all large language models. There is no avoiding this. These models are not built to be unique or creative. They're built to steal. And so you can look at these things and be scared. You can look at these things and say, they're coming for me. But again, how much better are they than 6 months ago or a year ago? And the answer is not much better at all. And also to scale in the way that they need them to will require them to do something entirely different. They would have to be able to get over numerous issues with mathematics.
One of the things that I've constantly heard about this, since this became such a big business concern, is it's only going to learn more. It's only going to keep getting better as, I guess, it crowdsources improvements from the world. So in the 2 years since then, what kind of progress has this model, but also other LLMs made?
Some progress. I do not think my experience with ChatGPT today is dramatically different to that of the one in November. And important to note, I had clients that were doing generative AI like 6 months before ChatGPT came out, I should probably mention. But on top of that, these models have improved. They give faster, more accurate answers. Some of them are really multimodal, so you can point it at a picture of something. You take a photo of something, and you can say, okay, what is this? And sometimes it will even get it right. But that's the problem. Sometimes.
Do we even have a way of quantifying just like how much money and time and promise has been sunk into this kind of AI by venture capital and by, we're talking about huge companies like Microsoft and Apple?
The estimates are somewhere in the hundreds of billions to $1 trillion over the next few years. I think Microsoft's probably put tens of billions into data centers. They became Oracle's largest client for data center build-outs. You can look at NVIDIA's numbers as well. Like, we are looking at hundreds of billions. I think that that's a fair and safe one to call.
Why would these companies put so much money into this if the use cases are, sort of as minuscule as you describe? Like, Apple is not a stupid company.
The overall reason they're doing this is because big tech has run out of ideas. And when I say ideas, I mean hyper-growth markets. In the 2000s and early 2010s, they were quite lucky. There were a lot of lands to conquer. There were lots of places to look at and say, okay, we can build out cloud compute because people need to run software on the internet. That's a classic thing. We can build out large ways to have data lakes and evaluate the data within them. Again, useful businesses. But since about 2015, tech really hasn't had a new $100 billion, trillion industry that they can point at and spill money out of. And during this time, management consultants and MBAs have poisoned the tech industry at scale. Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, McKinsey man. Sheryl Sandberg, former COO of Meta, McKinsey. Larry Summers' Department of Treasury. CEO of Amazon, Andy Jassy, MBA, replaced with Amazon Web Services by another MBA, who was then replaced by another MBA. The point I'm making is the people building tech are no longer running the tech industry. As a result, the people at the top are just thinking, what does growth look like? How do we get growth? Growth. What sounds like growth? AI sounds like something you can sell for growth. And it's something you can dedicate a lot of money to and say, look at all the things we're building. Look at how big and sexy this is going to be.
Right.
And because these people don't build anything and they're career product managers, MBAs, management consultants, what have you, and they have no participation in any of the production, they don't experience problems, thus they don't really solve them.
Give us a sense of what Goldman Sachs is looking for when it looks at AI and why we should take that seriously.
So Goldman Sachs back in late June put out a report called Gen AI, Too Much Spend, Not Enough Output, something along those lines. And when Goldman Sachs, global investment bank, puts these things out, it's them saying something they already know and have likely taken action on. They've probably already made the trades or what have you. Do not believe they're doing this out of the kindness of their hearts. That's not how investment banks work.
Right.
What they're doing here is trying to signal to the markets that they're concerned about something. In some ways, probably even trying to signal to the tech companies, hey, have you thought enough about this? But also, they're trying to get ahead of a story they're scared of. They're trying to make it clear that Goldman did not totally fumble the bag. After spending quite a few months, by the way, and actually over a year, putting out reports saying Gen AI could do things based on the flimsiest work ever. It's just stuff like, if generative AI creates a new job we don't know about, it will do this. This report, though, is grounded in hard, cold facts, full of interviews with a guy called Darren Acemoglu, who's a very well-known economist, talking about the lack of productivity gains, the lack of GDP gains. If Goldman is putting this out, then people need to be scared. They need to be scared about generative AI. I've been saying a lot of this stuff before. A lot of the things they've said in there, I fully agree with, and I love my biases being confirmed. But
of course,
at the same time, they're making the same argument, which is this is costing so much money and it's not doing enough. It's not doing nothing, but it's also not doing enough, even close to enough, to justify the incredible expenditure.
When we talk about the mainstream reporting around AI and even perhaps Goldman Sachs' previous analysis of Gen AI, what did that kind of stuff obfuscate, in your opinion?
The thing that these stories obfuscate is that they haven't really got a business plan yet, and they haven't for a while. Everyone's kind of carrying water for these companies and saying, well, when this happens, when obviously AI gets good enough to do this, as a result, thing will happen. And it's this big gap in the middle. It's this big, nasty gap. Again, compare it to the metaverse. Oh yeah, the metaverse will be big as long as we have a helmet I can put on that overtakes my senses and allows me to move through 3D space that's realistic enough that I don't feel sick being in it. Yeah, as long as they solve that very large problem, we should be there, right? We should be fine.
What's that large problem for Gen AI that it could solve theoretically and make all this work?
Oh, this is a good one. It's when it becomes sentient.
Oh.
It's when it is able to do human-level reasoning and theorizing, then it will be amazing. So once we make the computer come to life, generative AI is going to be so good. And by the way, generative AI cannot do that. It's maths. It's all maths. To do what OpenAI is claiming it could do, it's utter fantasy.
Why do so many people think it will eventually get there then? Because they do.
Because when you have to accept the fact that it won't, you have to accept the fact that billions and billions of dollars and thousands of headlines have happened that say it will. And that all of this money has gone into what exactly? I'm really confused with this whole thing because it doesn't even feel like these companies are being reported on correctly. It feels like the The trust is there in these companies, despite the fact that people like Sam Altman have been liars most of their careers. And it's just so strange. You'd think that people would have learned it. But I guess what their answer is just these big tech companies wouldn't put billions of dollars into useless nonsense, would they? Well, not useless, but quasi-useless. They wouldn't lie to us about what the possibilities are, right?
So let's talk about what happens when an investment bank confronts what you just described, that maybe we have to admit that this is never going to get there. Tell me about Jim Covello in the Goldman Sachs report. Who is he and why should we listen to him?
So Jim Covello, he's a beast. He's been around decades. He is one of the most respected semiconductors and tech analysts out there. And also, he's been around multiple booms and busts. So his whole thing was he dispelled several big notions that only he is really capable of dispelling. So one of them being, it's just like the early days of the internet. And he said, that's ahistorical. It's not like the early days of the internet because so people say, oh, well, there were $64,000 servers that the internet required to run. Very true. However, there were far less of them required to make the internet run. Also, people argue, well, the costs of tech at first are expensive. And he said, also wrong. The early days of the internet brought down the price of things like commerce because of e-commerce, immediate return on investment from e-commerce. And then another one I like is people claim that, oh, well, the early days of the smartphone, people said this was nonsense, right?
Right.
Wrong. He said he sat through thousands of presentations where people talked about smartphones in the early 2000s. People were already theorizing, saying that smaller GPS radios could allow you to do things like have ongoing map services on a mobile device. And he said that you would see these roadmaps for the future of smartphones that matched exactly what happened, fairly accurately at least, and that no such thing exists with AI. There is not actually a roadmap that this maps to. Where does this go? The answer's not necessarily anywhere. And the other thing he says, which is very important, is he said that the capex for this is going to be about $1 trillion between utility upgrades, server acquisition, basically all the involved costs of generative AI. Then asks a fairly simple question, which is, what is the $1 trillion problem that generative AI solves exactly? And the answer is there really isn't one.
Does he conclude that this is a bubble then?
He's hesitant to, but basically says it. His argument is that big tech is full of FOMO right now. Everyone's afraid of missing out on the big boom and that they're kind of married to it. If they pull out of AI now, their stock will drop because the markets are stupid. But he also argues that generative AI can only really go further in the event that it can solve complex problems, which it is not built to do. And that is probably worse than saying it's a bubble, because he's just saying it doesn't do the thing. And his argument is that it doesn't make humans smarter. It just makes them quicker at acquiring data. And also that if everyone can do this, if everyone can actually just get AI and do exactly the same thing, there isn't really any leg up for any company. Those building it, they're all building on the same training data. They're all building very similar products. So where's really the advantage? Where's the cool tech, the thing you can sell? Where is generative AI's NVIDIA on the software side? And the answer is nowhere.
If it is a bubble, given the way the tech economy is structured around it at this point, can anyone afford for that bubble to burst, or might money simply continue to get pumped into it because there's nowhere else to put it and this can't end?
So Mr. Covello makes a point that he says it's going to be another 12 to 18 months because the AI story is still selling for stocks. But once it pulls out, it's going to be brutal. And he doesn't really talk to what would happen next. But the reality is that the people that are going to get hurt are at the top of the stack, the big tech companies, for two reasons. Number one, they put billions of dollars into a thing that will leave them with a bunch of graphics processing units used for crunching the numbers. A bunch of that for no reason. They'll have these massive unused data centers. They will have spent all of this money and all of this time in something that doesn't really make them any money. They're going to see their stocks punished. On the lower end, this is going to lead to a vicious 20, 30% decline in these stocks. On the higher end, we see Sundar Pichai or Satya Nadella fired. So Sundar of Google and Satya of Microsoft. And you're going to see a lot of venture capitalists deeply embarrassed, but also the next step is the problem, regardless of how bad it is. What is there after generative AI? There isn't anything. They don't have a next step. They don't have a way of expressing growth to the market. And as a result, I believe that these companies that at least one big tech company is going to get savaged. I think we see Sundar Pichai get fired. He's been on the AI train outside and inside of generative AI for a while. And I think that he is the one on the chopping block. I think Satya Nadella is also weak because he so deeply tied himself to OpenAI. I also think we're going to see a kind of mental health crisis within tech as they realize that there really isn't a next big thing.
Will they actually then perhaps turn to improving the core services that made them what they are here? I mean, I could be speaking of anyone, but I guess I'm talking about Google.
I'm not sure where you got the idea that they do such a thing, but
it was wishful thinking, maybe.
Wishful thinking, but we are going to see a reckoning with the stock market and how the stock market evaluates these companies. And I hope that it changes how they do business, because the reality is these companies are exceedingly weak unless they can grow forever. If they grow forever, they're decently strong. Otherwise, their actual fundamental companies themselves are pretty bad. It sucks really bad because some of them, like Google, will have the capacity to do real good.
How will we know if this is a bubble and it bursts? Like, will there be a sign? Is there something you're watching for, maybe within the next 12 to 18 months, as Cavello says, but just in general, that will signal to you like, oh shit, everybody is now realizing that this is not happening?
It will be one of a few things. Number one, I expect one of the large overfunded AI companies to go kaput, probably Character.ai. I think there are some others, but Character.ai feels like the one for me, at least. The most obvious ones are going to be if NVIDIA stumbles at all. If NVIDIA starts saying, oh yeah, sales have slowed. But the real sign will be if Microsoft or Google, Microsoft really is the one I'm looking at. If they start getting their stocks dinged because the revenue growth isn't there. And once Microsoft stumbles, if they stumble for this reason, that begins the apocalypse.
Ed, thank you so much for this. I always appreciate you walking me through this super complex stuff.
My pleasure.
Ed Zitron is the author of Where's Your Ed At? And that was The Big Story. For more, you can head to thebigstorypodcast.ca. You can also send us feedback to hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or by calling us on the phone and leaving a voicemail, 416-935-5935. Bonus points if your response is generated by AI. The Big Story is available in every single podcast player and, of course, on your smart speaker. Just ask it to play The Big Story podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. We'll have a special treat in the feed for you. As usual, on the weekend, we'll have a feedback episode for you on the holiday Monday, and we'll be back with a fresh big story on Tuesday. We'll talk then.